All right, I will go on and introduce my wonderful guest today, who, if you are Irish, I'm sure needs no introduction, but for our broader audience, I will do my introduction right now for Joanne. So, Joanne is an Irish activist and sports journalist. Joanne is one of 7 currently living people born with the condition Tetra-amelia syndrome. This means she was born without all 4 limbs, and even though there is no medical explanation as to why this happened, Joanne, or indeed her family, has never allowed it to hold her back. Joanne first gained attention for skipping school to confront the then Irish Taoiseach Enda Kenny about his proposed plan to reduce disability funding during his election. In April 2012, she spoke before the UN and challenged the body to create technology to help disabled people such as herself. She was named Young Person of the Year at the People of the Year Awards in 2012. Joanne is an activist for people with disabilities, a motivational speaker, and a sports columnist with the Irish Times. She appears in the 2013 documentary No Limbs, No Limits, and she is currently training to become a solicitor. Joanne, so excited to have you on. How's it going?
Thanks, Podge. I have to say, my father doesn't get excited about many things that I do in my life, but this thing really sent him over the edge when he heard it was you. He was like, cancel all your plans, meetings, study, whatever you need to do, get on the phone to that man. I was like, okay, father. So I
Oh,
did. I'm here.
brilliant. So you were going to say no otherwise, right? But your father was a good influence on you there.
He has a slight man crush on you, let's put it like that.
I'll slip him a 50 euro note and say thank you for the kind
You
words.
don't even need to because it's all organic on his end.
That's sweet. And it's actually really, I don't know if I want to say ironic or funny that you brought up your dad, because when we were actually talking about this podcast and what we could perhaps talk about, I know we have the Paralympics that we will get onto as well because you're just recently back from Paris. But a lot of conversation organically brought up your family when you were mentioning like the Baptista bombs with your brother, which for people who don't know are not an alcoholic shot. They're in fact a wrestling move. But your family came into it quite a lot, and I found that really, really interesting, and I really wanted to kind of learn more. And I'm wondering, could you share maybe more about the role your family has played in helping you become the person that you are today?
Yeah, like I guess I there's 5 in total in my family, excluding my parents, so there's 7 of us in total. I'm the youngest by 8 years, so the gap between me and my sister is 8 years, and then the gap between me and the oldest brother is 15 years. So there's a huge, huge gap between us. So yeah, I suppose really growing up, I suppose as I said, my brother was 15 when I was born. Second in line would have been 14, then 12, and then 8. So there was a whole, family that needed to be, tended to, despite me being born the way that I was. And I suppose, although doctors and certain medical professionals would have said to my family not to, this is in the 90s, like to kind of bring me outside because you don't really see kids with disabilities outside. My parents had no option because they had 4 other children who wanted to go to football training, or they wanted to do Batista bombs on each other, and a whole load of different things. So yeah, I think I was brought home from the hospital 2 days old, and by the 4th or 5th day, I was at a football match for one of my older brothers. So yeah, we're an incredibly tight-knit family, and even though there's a good gap between us, we're all still incredibly, ridiculously close to each other. I was only saying to a friend recently how, like, when I was about 3 or 4, my eldest brother was taking me to concerts and festivals, because my parents just wanted me out and about and like living life like everyone else. And I guess it's handy when you have a very much older
Mhm.
sibling. Because then they can take you places, like I can remember, going to ridiculous places, my siblings, I mean, they take me cinema, Aquadome, in Tralee. They would take me to any concert or festival that was going on. Wrestling, like live wrestling events that was taking place in Dublin, they take me to that. So yeah, anything that I needed, I suppose, to do to kind of get out, they would take me. And then naturally, then when they were playing football or other sports, growing up, I was tagging along with them. So yeah, it was definitely, we're very tight knit, and we are very close. And but we're all very close, like for different reasons. Like me and my eldest brother, we would actually be probably the closest because we would have gone to a good few places together. And then me and my other brother, Denny was the one who was playing sports when I was a child. So naturally, we would be watching football or, doing sporting events together or doing whatever it may be. Stephen, my other brother, he's the one who made the documentary about my life, No Limbs, No Limits. I suppose we just have the same mindset and mentality about a lot of things, in terms of, like you were saying in the introduction, sharing people's stories and interest in what people have to say. And I suppose an interest in justice, I guess, more than anything. And then being my sister Gillian, we're the two girly ones as well. So, you can get girly with her, but yet at the same time, it's funny. Like she's, ploughing her trade now in administration over in my dad's local club. She's the first female secretary in Drumtarf GA. So it is interesting how, like, you get such a random mix of people and we all just go off and do our own thing.
When speaking about your family, I think support is the word that comes to my mind. How has their support helped you to maybe tackle the challenges that you've faced, maybe both as an activist and in your personal life?
Yeah, like I think for my siblings more than anything, like they just wanted me to do things that they were doing, so I remember when I was particularly young, they would have I think it was an Atari or PlayStation 1, one of the two of those anyway, and we'd be playing games on it and they threw the controller at me and they were like, just play it, lad. So I was very young at the time, so I was like, okay. So I hadn't a clue what I was doing, but ironically enough then, like playing the Atari with them, that's actually how I got my first wheelchair when I was 2 years old. My oldest brother came with me to pick it up, and the people who were delivering it, like these things are expensive kit, like I mean this wheelchair is 15 to 20,000, so like handing it off to a 2-year-old wasn't the most ideal situation for all involved. So then we got it and they were like, she'll never drive it, and my brother was like, well, how do you drive it? And they were like, oh, there's a joystick basically, like an analog stick on a controller. So my brother was like, oh, Joanne, it's like Grand Theft Auto, like just press it forward and you'll go. And I zoomed out of the warehouse and like went home basically. So like that's, so I think it's just that kind of level of, like, I suppose that expectation. I think like they just always had such high expectations kind of no matter what, and even though they knew certain things were kind of different in terms of how I do it, like they didn't really care if it took me 5 minutes longer, like it didn't matter. But we're a very competitive family as well, so like if it took me 5 minutes longer, they would challenge me to make sure that it was 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, and then I was eventually catching up to them. So there's a lot of things I suppose that you have to credit them with for at the moment. So like when I type, so I put a pen in my mouth and I bang on the keys like Woody Woodpecker, and basically at the moment I can do 42 words a minute. So yeah, that was important then, like later on in career choice, because when I was covering matches, you needed to get like between 800 words to 1,000 words out in 20 minutes, because people want their articles like now. So then that was a very useful skill, so little did I know when we were challenging each other to type offs that it would be worthwhile like 20 odd years later. So yeah, like I think, they all had an impact in their own little way. I guess me and Stephen were the two who were most obsessed with like again, like activism and like trying to make things a little bit better. And he was always involved in different projects. I remember growing up, like he worked with the Magdalene Laundries, and he got the victims of the Magdalene Laundries an apology. For international viewers, basically it was when some aspects of the church basically had women working in laundries unpaid and stuff like that. So yeah, like it was interesting kind of seeing that as well growing up. But then if you talk to my two older siblings, like the Dennis and Danny, my sister Gillian as well, they have no interest in any of this stuff. Like they actually couldn't care less. So yeah, it's interesting to see like the difference in all like the personality. So yeah, I think Stephen would have maybe had the big impact in terms of activism and stuff like that, but the other two in terms of their competitiveness and making me do things a bit faster or quicker or whatever, that helped then later on in life for different jobs or anything that I was going for.
Sounds like you've learned quite a lot. I'm curious if you can sum it down to one thing. What's the most important lesson your family has taught you that you carry with you in everything you do?
Resilience, I think, hands down, because we always used to beat each other up like normal siblings. And my eldest brother used to always say, life beats you down and you bounced back pretty fine when I beat you up. So yeah, like it's just one thing. I think no matter how many times, you'd fall or have an incident, it's just, getting up and trying to overcome that obstacle. So resilience was the big one, I think.
Yeah, I think, and that resilience obviously feeds into everything that you have done or that you're currently doing today. And I'd love to kind of go back to your introduction. And is it fair to say you first gained attention as a young activist when you did skip school that day to confront the Artaoiseach and the Kenny?
Yeah, it was my junior cert mock. I was doing French, my junior cert French mock. Kind of ironic considering I needed it. But yeah, Enda Kenny was in town, and I always, I don't know, I guess my family were bad Fine Gaelers, and it was very exciting because they were very close to being, they were elected then the leaders for after a long time. So, I literally only went to get a picture with him, and then my dad was like, I'm literally in Dad's office now actually, so if his boss is hearing, this didn't happen. But Dad basically would like ask a good question because I didn't miss my lunch, like for you to just get a picture and go home basically. So I was like, fine. So I was like 15 at the time. So I basically asked him what would he do to protect, I guess, people with disabilities. And then that was in February. And then in December of that year, they made a cut to like the payments that are made for 16 to 18-year-olds. So like that was kind of my time of getting it. So it was a payment made for like whatever like the child needed, like additionally, whatever it was. So they were making a cut to that payment, and they were skipping you on to an adult style payment, which I wouldn't have benefited from because I wasn't an adult, and it was my mother who was still receiving it, and she didn't want it. She wanted the child version so she could put it into education or college or whatever it is that I needed to do. So yeah, it didn't really make sense, and the money was cut significantly. And then I guess I had made friends with a journalist in the Irish Examiner, Owen English, and he reached out to me and he said, I know you want to be a journalist. Do you want to write something about this? So I was like, okay. I was in TY at the time. I was doing my BT Young Scientist project. Actually, my poor friend who was doing it with me, she was like, are you ever going to come back, or am I doing this on my own? I was like, I have no idea, girl. I basically wrote a letter like to the Irish Examiner, but to Enda Kenny, stating like how this cut was going to affect so many people in the similar position. And I made front page of the Irish Examiner, and that was really it.
So for those outside of Ireland, when Joanne is mentioning Enda Kenny and mentioning like the Irish Taoiseach, make things easy. We can make it the equivalent of the president of Ireland, essentially, we'd say. So when Joanne's talking about that, it's a pretty big deal for someone so young. And Joanne, I'd love to know, like, maybe what motivated you, or what was going through your mind at the time. Like, were you scared to reach or to talk to someone of that much status? Did you not give two hoots, which is probably what I'm thinking, given how much I know you? I'm curious to know what your motivation was.
No, like I was a teenager, like, and typical teenager, like you think the world revolves around you. I think definitely now I would have had some bit of decorum and vibe about me, whereas when you're a teenager, you don't really care, I think that was the big thing. And maybe in a way I was fortunate that I was a teenager, because you do have that fearlessness in you, like as a child, that's not really taken out of you until you're much, much older. So yeah, like it didn't really bother me, to be honest, but when other like things started coming in, so I guess basically the Late Late Show, which is like one of the biggest shows, live chat shows in Ireland, came then, and they asked would I go on it? Obviously, that was a huge, huge moment. And again, because I was a teenager, I thought, well, why not? So yeah, like that was absolutely monumental. Like looking back on it, I mean, like that show at the time got, I think, over 800,000 viewers, because it was around the Christmas time. So yeah,
Wow.
like I mean, that's huge for Ireland. Like that's like a good nearly a quarter of the country nearly, at that time anyway. So yeah, it was massive. And I guess you don't really realize the impact until you're like outside. But like now, having like got a bit older, like gone through college, done my year abroad, working in the jobs that I'm working in, I think it's only now you realize how significant that is. Like when I was writing for the Irish Times and you'd be doing pieces, I think a lot of times you forget, like you just forget how powerful a piece can possibly be, and you actually don't know who's reading it at the end of the day. And I think that was the lucky thing with that Irish Examiner letter. We just didn't know who was reading it, and fortunately the right people were reading it at the right time, and that's how it all happened.
Was that the most important lesson that you learned from confronting a world leader at such a young age?
I don't think probably I learned to anything. I don't think as a teenager, like you're ready to learn things like that. I think it's only when, I think, like I always say, it was only when I moved abroad to England for my college, for my Erasmus program, for my year abroad for college, that's probably when I realized most of the stuff that I did, because you find yourself in a situation where you're living with people that don't know you like at all, and they only see you as basically the girl with no limbs. So you're back to rebattling a stereotype that you would have overcame, when I had done all the stuff that I'd done in Ireland. So then all of a sudden they're like, why are you taking like random phone calls at radio stations? Or like, why are you getting flowers from like random, like that's really bizarre. And then eventually you'd have to say, oh, I do this. And I think it was funny, not to skip ahead in the conversation, but it wasn't until so the documentary, the one that my brother made about me, No Limbs, No Limits, basically it got called into an international film festival in Russia. So I had to go to Russia in the middle of my year abroad. And I was living in England at the time, and there was some diplomatic relations not going according to plan. So I was very close to not going solely because of that. And then the ambassadors called and they were like, okay, like you can go. So I went to Russia, and then my housemates were like, but why are you going to Russia? And I was like, like no reason. Because at the time I just wanted them to figure out who I was first, rather than actually, them being like, oh, she's on TV, and, them having a perception, or, them maybe treating you a bit differently. So my ideal situation was I wanted them to get to know me as, someone who was interested in sport, someone who likes to lounge because I'm very lazy, someone who likes chicken goujons, rather than like the girl who's done all these ridiculous things. Because you know, like people's perception is a huge thing as well, you know, and that was one thing that I wanted to overcome before having to go into the TV thing. Now, if they did keep seeing me as a girl with no limbs, I was ready to launch into the TV stuff, but you know, that was basically my
You,
apparatus there.
yeah, you had your backup, and it's interesting that you've said that as well. Just from I suppose recent conversations, like I had a conversation with Shane O'Donnell, and he said something very similar. He went to Harvard to study, but he didn't want to be known as the guy who scored the 3 goals in the All Ireland final or the hurler. He just wanted people to take him on face value, like the type of person that he is, like the everyday type of person you mentioned about the chicken goujons, you know. I just think it is interesting when you step into different environments. You're hoping people don't have, I guess it's preconceived notions around you. You mentioned with having no limbs, and then you mentioned if they've seen that side of your life, they just might come to conclusions without actually truly getting to know who you are as a person.
Yeah, like I guess there's two, you know, there's two conclusions you can come to when you look at me. Like if you look at me in Ireland, like at a football match, whatever it may be, like people will either see the no limbs or they'll see the TV Joanne. Like, and that's two, like I would guess they could be, well, the no limbs would be conceived more as a negative connotation because that's just the attitude I guess we have towards disability in Ireland. And, you know, that's definitely one thing, you know, that I would try to shake. Like it doesn't bother me. Like, you know, I was at, myself and my cousin went to dinner and she went up paying and they were like, what table are you at? And she was like, oh, the girl with the blonde hair over there. But like there was 50 people with blonde hair in the restaurant. And she came down and she was all in a fluster. And I was like, what are you panicking for? And she was like, I just didn't know how to describe you. And I was like, I've no limbs. Like no one else in this restaurant has no limbs. Just say it. And she was like, I don't know, like I just felt weird saying it because you hate it. I was like, yeah, but like you're pointing out an obvious person, you know, like it doesn't bother me in that regard. But yeah, like I think then just what, you know, I understand what she meant, you know, because I know like I've been battling it for so long in terms of the like people looking at me kind of being like, oh, poor her, or she mustn't be able to do anything, or God, life must be really miserable for her. And like, you know, don't get me wrong, like life is not great at times, but like the same with everyone's life. Like we all have hurdles and obstacles we all have to jump over. But I guess mine just look physically way worse because it looks physically way worse. So yeah, I think that's once I wanted to overcome that kind of barrier in my accommodation over in England, then I was able to tackle kind of the other stuff because you know you just want, I suppose it's like everything in life, you just want people to see the person, and not like the physical thing that people are looking at. But again, like not to skip ahead, like when I was in Paris for the Paralympics, like I was staring at all the prosthetics and the wheelchairs and the blades, you know. So like I don't mind people staring or asking a question, but like it's about having the confidence to ask the question, not just to like creepily stare someone out of it, you know?
Yeah, and that's if we can explore this for a second, and then we'll get on to the Paralympics. I think it'll be a nice kind of segue into the conversation. What would an ideal scenario or ideal state for you? So if you take the instance there when someone's at the restaurant and they're saying which table, like would you think it's like they should be able to just point down and say like the table there with the person with no limbs, and there's nothing, as in there's no more about it, it's just kind of normalized action, versus you're saying if it happens now, people, there is kind of like that preconceived notions, or people might look at you a little different as a result? Or let's try explore that a little bit.
Yeah, like I guess like it's a physical trait, so like it doesn't bother me, you know. I mean, it'd be the same way if I was talking about you, it'd be like that really tall fella who plays football. Well, in my mind, you're tall. So like the first thing you're going to point out is the physical, you know, difference between everyone. So that doesn't bother me. If you want, you know, if you're paying at a restaurant or whatever, like it is what it is, you know. The same thing happened, you know, living over in England. My one of my best friends, like she's Muslim, so you know, like she's brown. I remember we were at a restaurant and my brother was meeting us and the lady was like, oh, which table are you meeting? And he was like, oh, one has blonde hair, one has black hair. And he didn't tell me until maybe 6 weeks later. He didn't mind telling me because he knew I would laugh at it. And I said it to her because we were very friendly at this stage. And she was like, but why didn't he just say like the brown girl or the girl missing her limbs or the girl in the wheelchair? I was like, I don't know, man. Maybe he was trying to be PC. And she was like, oh, I hate when that happens, you know. And I was just laughing with her because obviously she understood where it was coming from as well. And we were both just laughing to ourselves. But honestly, I think it's just going back to the stereotype that people automatically assume, which is there's something different or there's something wrong about you, and that's a negative thing. You know, like it was the same when we were over for the Paralympics. Like if I was commenting on someone, if they had passed by, I'd be like, Jesus, did you see the girl there missing her leg? She had the blade there for the left leg. You know, like it is what it is. Like it wasn't that I was being negative. It's just I was like, God, that was a mad bit of, you know, technology or prosthetic that I've never seen before in my life. And you know, like we're all in like inquisitive and we all want to find out each other's stories, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I don't mind sharing my story. Now, obviously, if I'm having like a 3-course meal and you're like, hey, tell me your life story, I'll be like, dude, you know, like seriously. But like it is what it is, you know, like I'm a public figure, so like it doesn't really bother me anymore. And I'm happy to share my story. And I think that's what I always hate the most. If, you know, I'm terrible with children anyway, just to pre-qualify this. But when they're like, "Oh, mom, like, why is she missing her arms and legs?" And the mom shushes them. I'm like, "Well, don't shush them. Like bring them over, like, or just like you've seen me on TV probably, so just explain to them. Oh, I think she was born like that. Like, it's not that hard, And then if they want to ask a question, then let them ask a question. Like, it is what it is, and it's just all about learning and I guess normalizing the differences that exist in civilization. Like I say to people all the time, like there's only 7 other people who look like me in the world, like literally like the exact same shape as me. So like, of course you're going to be staring going, I've never seen this before in my life, because you haven't. There's only 7.
Yeah, that is wild. And hey, if you can trust kids to give you the unfiltered questions as well, right? They could come out with anything.
I've nieces and nephews. I've experienced it all firsthand, and I've managed to survive, not traumatized. So I think I could nearly handle what's thrown at me. There's still the odd one that would throw something wild. You're like, whoa. So yeah, no, I do a couple of school talks as well. Like, when I have the time, like for young kids, and you have like a pre-written thing, like that you've written out just to give you a bit of background. But like after 30 seconds, that's out the window because they're like, "What's wrong with you? Like, tell us now." And you're like, "If you just give me 2 seconds, like I'll tell you." So yeah, no, like it's fun, like it's funny, so it doesn't bother me in the slightest. But I can tell if you're shy and a bit ox, like yeah, it would bother you, but I am not, so it doesn't bother
Yeah,
me.
you're definitely not. Before we go on to chat about the Paralympics, just recently I can hear a bit of muffling. I don't know if it's the headphones, Joanne, but we'll try to do a test just to see.
I'm not
Um,
too sure. It actually could be me hitting off this bottle. I think that could be the problem here. I was kind of moving.
all right, cool. Okay, let's jump in. You definitely like you've recently been in Paris with the Paralympics. Like, tell us about your experience there.
Yeah, like I'm definitely having like a big come down, like from it. Like I didn't anticipate the come down that I would have after it. Like I guess I was living such a rigorous life, with filming and the broadcasting and the interviewing and stuff like that. And the highs of it, I think, more than anything. And I think one of the big thrills, I guess, on my end was seeing people who looked like me. Like I don't see people who look like me quite frequently. And I think that was one of the big things, like standing in a restaurant and someone missing 3 limbs maybe would come up behind you and you're like, whoa, like I haven't seen anyone who looked like me ever. And we're all just ordering like I don't know, it was quiche Lorraine for me. It was brutal, by the way. The village food was so bad. But yeah, so like it was kind of weird. So I got the opportunity to go over with our national broadcaster, RTE, and I had done a Paralympics in Dublin because it was the COVID one. It was in Tokyo. So I obviously couldn't get to Tokyo with the COVID restrictions and stuff. So this time I was given the opportunity to go to Paris. And obviously I said, yeah, absolutely. Flew over to Paris, was based in the village in terms of work. So I was in the village for 8 hours of my day, I guess. So yeah, like you'd see such a wide range of people. I met so many cool people. And I think the big thing, like the big come down is just you go from like a celebration of like disability and difference to all of a sudden standing in like super value and there's like people staring at you, so like it's really funny, like the big come down that you have. And I was talking to a friend who would have competed a couple of years ago. She won I think she won silver in Rio. She'll totally kill me if I got that wrong. And she was saying, yeah, she was like, it's huge. She was like, the come down is ridiculous. She was like, you just want to like tear up your life and like start again. I was like, yeah, that's basically it. So yeah, it was really, really fun. I honestly, it was one of the best experiences of my life. I think you know yourself, like while you're living it and while you're going through a crazy life scenario, like you just take it on day by day. And it's only when you sit down and reflect, you're like, whoa, that actually had such an impact on me that I didn't anticipate. And I honestly, hand on heart, didn't anticipate to be like deep thinking about my life like a week after coming home from Paris. Like I literally thought it was another job, tick it off the bucket list. Thanks, job well done, and move on in my life. But no, it's honestly left a mark, and it's very hard to describe it and verbalize it, I think, to people.
Oh, so yeah, I suppose it's a bit of a mix of everything, right? You have the mad excitement. You're also probably very fixated on trying to do a good job. Like as you said, it's a national broadcast. It's going out to everybody in Ireland as well. So it's if you want to say it's high pressure, I'm sure you mightn't see it as that. You're so comfortable at this stage. But yeah, it seems like such a dopamine rush or just mad excitement. You're also in this, like you gave the example of being back in super value. So you're in this kind of environment that you're ordinarily like never in. And that's another bit of a come down. So there's a lot of aspects to that I can see when you do come home. It's it's not the same, but I know when you go on something like a holiday, or if you do play a big sports event and then it finishes, there tends to be that realization after, or that come down effect too. So it sounds like you experienced something similar.
Yeah, it's bizarre. Like, and I mean, I only thought it was an athlete, that, experienced it, because a lot of them would have dedicated 3, 4 years of their lives to it. So I can
Mhm.
understand them coming down. I can absolutely, but like I was only there for 14 days. Fair enough, the week before I was prepping, but like that's sitting at home with my dog. Like that wasn't like huge, and same with the broadcasting. Like, I mean, I'm very accustomed to it. I'm very used to it. It was my second bite, that cherry. And it was absolutely fine. I honestly can't tell you like where the come down like even started or began. Like I genuinely don't know. I just remember last kind of Wednesday, like last week, Wednesday, Thursday, just before I had the call with you, actually, I remember just thinking like I don't know if life will ever be the same. Like I don't know. And as I was saying to you, my friend from England, she's a psychologist, so she was actually on holiday as well. So I texted her when she came back, and she was like, "Oh, I'm too depressed for my holiday. Like I can't answer these like until like tomorrow." And I was like, "All right, fine." And then she texted me the following day. She was like, dude, like it's normal. She was like, you don't have to be an athlete to experience it. She was like, she's like, it's same. Like as you said, when you come back from a holiday. And like you said, I think it was the dopamine rush, which I probably didn't anticipate. The rush of hearing like 3, 2, live, and then you can't really like you're frozen basically in a spot for 4 hours, and you can't really do much. And you've people, shouting in your ear. My producers were Steve and Miriam, and I'm good friends with Miriam away from it. And it was the first time I was actually working with a friend. So it was very bizarre to have that crossover because Miriam was in charge of me. So a lot of the time it'd be in your ear. So like you'd be having a conversation the way we are now, and it could be about, let's say, Podge, and you've just won Paralympic gold in swimming, and this is Podge's disability, and all you'd hear is Miriam to Joanne, your time is running out, Miriam to Joanne. And you're like, yeah, so Podge is so, so great. And Podge, yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's all you're hearing in your ear. And your brain is like trying to form a thought. So yeah, it was definitely a weird experience in terms of that. But no, I honestly thoroughly enjoyed it. And then I was fortunate because we're obviously with the broadcasters, you can go into all the mix zones and the areas afterwards. So I went to the Stade de France mix zone and got to meet some of the other athletes, and made friends with a Chinese athlete, Wang Zhang, who won bronze in shot put. So me and Wang Zhang got a
Shout
picture.
out.
Shout out to Wang, even though he'll never listen to this because I don't know where Wang Zhang is. Wang Zhang went off on his merry way with his bronze medal off to the club, I'm convinced. So yeah, no, it was definitely really, really fun. And I think as well, like what I noticed the big difference over there was normally when you're having a conversation with people, not in any professional capacity, but if you're standing next to other journalists, say, and I would have had this working as a journalist, they'd have been like, oh, like, and what's your disability? Like, tell us about you. And, you're like, oh, blah, blah, blah. You're explaining a little bit of your story. But whereas in the Paralympics, the first thing I got was, who do you work with? And how long have you been working with them? So it was really funny that they just saw past everything. I don't know whether that's because they've been working with people, like who have a disability, like different athletes, and therefore they just are immune to it, or like what it was. But it was really refreshing to be standing next to someone and not having the, oh, like, and why are you missing your limbs straight away? It was like, oh, who do you work for? And oh, what are they like to work for? Like, are they big? And answering those questions, be the equivalent of you went over, and was talking about your job, before you'd have to answer all the stuff about like who you look like and what you are and why you look like that. So that was another really bizarre thing that I never would have experienced before up until that point. Like, and like I'm 28 years old, so to experience that for the first time was really bizarre. Like,
Yeah, I was going to say it sounds like it must have been refreshing as well. You were almost maybe caught off guard. You were probably in pilot mode, getting ready to answer what you thought the question would be. And then you're like, oh wait, what's going on?
oh, no, no, no. I mean, I think it was just funny, like when you just said about the dopamine rush, and kind of clicked to me. I was like, oh yeah, like that'll be part of it. And the come down. I think it just goes back to probably, the purpose of all of these chats, which is like, how do you come back from the come down, and all that kind of stuff. And, obviously at the moment I'm struggling. Well, struggling is a bit dramatic, but I'm trying to grasp that as well. And, I'm going back to, certain, default things that I would do, like I watch, if I'm in a bad mood, I watch trash television. I like to watch TV that doesn't increase my IQ when I'm in a bad mood. I like to, I'm a writer by trade, so I write out, stuff that I'm feeling, or, different kind of thing. So it's mad, like when you go back to all those default settings and they're still not working for you, and you're like, what is going on? Like, why can't I shake it? So yeah, it is very interesting. And in the other work that I do as a public speaker, you get to meet, some of these incredible psychologists and, people who worked with top teams or top athletes. And then you're going back to kind of what they would have, the best thing about being a journalist is you can interview these people and pretend that like this is a general problem. So you're like, so like I was talking to someone recently, but like you're the one who's got the problem, so I did that a couple of times when I was interviewing psychologists. It's like free therapy, so my editor, if he hears that, he'd be like, what? That never made the final cut. So yeah, like it was just interesting to hear, like think back on some of the stuff they were saying. And Bob Bertella, he's a golf psychologist. I got to interview him during COVID, and he basically talks about life being like 18 holes basically. And the whole idea being that if you kind of in golf, I have no idea if you play golf or if anyone listening plays golf. I love golf. So he was basically saying that when you go to your next shot, and if you miss it and if you're a bit stressed and tense out for the next one, that shot is going to go wayward because your body is tense and you can, your body doesn't react well when it's tense and whatever. And that's basically how I've been taking every day. Basically, it's kind of like taking his advice and trying to go into everything that I have to do with a refreshed mindset and just dropping the Paralympics from my brain. And, I have my law exams coming up as well in 2 weeks' time. So, like that's how I've been treating it. I'm like just taking it a day at a time. And then at the end of the night, then I'm having my deep think to myself going, okay, like, what am I doing and how can I fix that? Or, is there anything that I can do now? So yeah, it was basically his advice that I'm working off at the moment. So hopefully it'll work.
It reminds me of a similar concept. I don't know if it's actually coined by Adam Grant, who's a work psychologist. He's a really fascinating fella in that field, but he coined something the second grade. So it's like if you're in a classroom, you get your result and it's an F and you're like, oh, why did I get this F? You can react and say, teacher, like you're totally wrong here. Like this isn't an F. I'm better than this. You can look to the person beside you and say, you distracted me, you so and so and so and so. Or you can actually just react. And that's the second grade, is like, how do you react to what you've just received? Saying, oh, it's out of my control. It's gone. Now I need to focus on X, Y, Z. And it seems similar to the golf analogy, right? Once you hit the shot, like that shot's gone. You can dwell on it and it'll probably affect the rest of your shots, or you can just leave it behind you and just move on to the next one. And it's just reminding me of that concept too. So that's kind of what you like to do in life. You have your moment. So with the Paralympics, but you also can't be suppressing, right? You have to deal with the fact, okay, like I'm on a come down here. I think normalizing and verbalizing is probably a part of that step as well.
Yeah, exactly. And like, that's what he would recommend then, like after your 18 holes are done. So whether that's like your job or whatever it is that you're doing, like your 9 to 5 or a task that you're trying to do, then you can go back and reflect because the task is done, and like that stress is no longer going to inhibit the task. So you can therefore release that stress then on something else, and for him, it would be like, all golfers have to do obviously their scorecard at the end of it. And he would basically say that you should be doing your scorecard then at the end of whatever task it is and going, okay, like what was impacted, what was wrong, like what did I need to fix there, how will I attack like that par 3 or par 4 or whatever it is the following day. So like that's basically kind of his recommendation, is to take the tasks as they come, but then have your little moment where you have to sit in the booth with your scorecard after and calculate, give yourself a grade basically in terms of where did you go wrong or where do you think can get better. And like it's not fun, like, and it's I think when people hear people doing it, I think they envision me sitting at my laptop like doing like part 1 of my day, like F, but that's not it. It's just more you're just thinking about stuff, and I'm a writer anyway, so I will write stuff down on my phone. I hope my notes app never gets hacked because God knows what you can find on it. Like I'd say there's stuff from way before I even went to college, which was like 10 years ago now. But yeah, like it's just about being able to, like, as you said, verbalize, compartmentalize, and be able to kind of get it off your brain, rather than letting it dwell and focus more than anything. So yeah, I just found that very impactful. And I think then when things are really, really bad, which thankfully, touch wood, that's never happened to me. Caroline Currid, who was in working with the Limerick Hurlers at the time here in Ireland, her advice was wade through the like SHITE. So, and I thought, man, if that's the psychological quote for it, I'm robbing that, because I would just be like, oh, sometimes you just got to put the head down and get through it, like if I'm speaking to kids especially. And she was like, no, she was like, you got to wait. And I think one thing that I learned there was, talking to other sports psychologists, they'd always say like 1% is better than no percent. So even if you tackle that task and you only get 1% of it done, that's fine, because at least it's not 0%. At least you've only 99 left to go. So that's usually as well what I would try to do. Like if I really don't want to tackle something, like some of these legal questions that I'm looking at the moment, I'm like, okay, Joanne, like just do half it. Like if you just do half it, go have your lunch, you can come back to it then afterwards. And that's also a thing that I learned as well, big time, and that was actually mainly a thing when I was actually starting to kind of work out and get back to the gym and yoga and stuff, where I wanted to skip a day and I'd be like, oh my God, like 5 minutes is better than no minute. Like, it's fine, and that's how I started, entertaining that idea then.
Yeah, we've done previous podcasts titled actually Celebrating the Small Wins. And I think it's something we underestimate, right? We think we have to go big or go home. And often that's not the case. It's just about doing one small step at a time. Like you mentioned, the 1%ers. Such an important concept, I think, shouldn't be overlooked. And going back to the golf analogy briefly, I really liked the scorecard bit at the end, right? Because there's an element of trust. Like if I want, I can knock a few scores. Like I could say, oh, I did better than I did, but really I'm only lying to myself and eventually I'm going to get caught out. So there is that element of trust. Like I have to fill out the scorecard and be honest and evaluate myself as honestly as I possibly can.
Yeah, exactly. Like when we were younger, my mother used to always say, you're only fooling yourself. Oh my God, I used to hate hearing that like every time. Like if one of my brothers like skipped going to training, or if I wasn't studying for an exam, she'd be like, I don't care. Like I'm not taking the exam. No, it's not going to reflect on me. It's only you. So yeah, that's what she'd always say if you were sitting in like the kitchen, like dilly-dally. She'd be like, did you study? And you'd be like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And she'd be like, I don't care, Joanne, you're only fooling yourself. So obviously her saying that nonstop to me has ingrained into my soul at some stage. So yeah, it's funny, isn't it, how little things like that stick with you. So yeah, it was like you said, it's trust. And like you just said, as my mother would say, it's only yourself you're fooling. So she's right. Like you will get caught at some stage and then it's way worse.
Yeah, as much as it probably irked you to hear when you were younger. I mean, it's sage advice and is definitely a correct one, I think.
It still annoys me now when she says that. I'm like, shut up.
I hope she listens to this and you just go over to her and she starts saying it to you.
She will. Like she literally, she said it to me already. Like, she said it to me a couple of times this week already when I was depressed and kind of wallowing. And she was like, you're not studying. And I was like, I'll do it tomorrow. She was like, well, I don't care. I'm not taking the exams. I was like, all right, okay,
I
fine.
love it. Reverse psychology at its finest.
Literally, like, yeah.
Joanne, we kind of getting back to the Paralympics, and I know tying this in with maybe 2012 when you addressed the UN, a big aspect of that was around you wanted improved technology for just in general. I'm guessing. I'm curious if you observed that over at the Paralympics. Like, did the technology blow your mind, or was it the opposite? Were you saying, I feel we should be further advanced than what we are? What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, there was a mix of both, I guess. Like there was a mix of I couldn't get over how far like prosthetics and stuff like that has come since, I was trialed. I don't have enough limb anyway for a prosthetic. So a lot of mine would have been aesthetic and my siblings didn't like it when I was younger. They were like, just let her look like the way she is. So we never actually went ahead with the aesthetic prosthetics is kind of what they're called. So it's to make you kind of look, but my siblings hated that. They were like, whatever, like she is what she is, like who cares?
Yeah.
And they actually thought I looked worse. So they're very supportive people. I remember the exact word Denny, my brother, said was, you look like a doll and I want to pick you up and like slam you off a wall. Like he used to do it on my sister's dolls. And I was like, thanks, Denny. That's very optimistic. So yeah, that was it. And when I got to see the prosthetics then over in Paris, like it was all really interesting. And I got to meet Marcus Rem, so he's the blade jumper. He's German, so his record is 8.72 meters, so that's the world record and Paralympic record, and that distance would have won him gold in the last 4 Olympic games. And basically he was saying that at the moment, because he's 36, and he was saying he's having like a minor crisis because he doesn't know whether it's the tech that's pushing him further or his body is able to push further. And that's why he's able to get the records. And it was just a really interesting conversation to sit and listen to. I wasn't part of it because I was waiting for a photo like the little fangirl that I am, talking to his PR advisor. And I just thought it was interesting because he said at the end of the day, like when I'm training and if I'm getting like 6 meters or 5 meters in a jump, I don't know which to blame, whether it's the blade or whether it's me. Like, so he was saying that he's finding that very difficult to deal with at the moment. And anyway, he's on an ongoing battle anyway with the IOC and with the IAAF. So they're both the bodies for the Olympic Committee and the International Athletics committees. Basically, they won't let him in because they think his blade gives him an unfair advantage. And he's trying to prove that, like, it's not the blade, like, it's the person on the blade that's the advantage, So I don't know whether he'll be successful is a whole other story, but he seems to be hell bent on it. And as someone who did sports law, I was like, dude, I'll take you to the, the court, like the court of arbitration for sport, no bads. So yeah, like it was just really, really interesting to hear. And then on the flip side, then it was all the basic stuff that I think people take for granted. Like the ramps were all very like normal. Now, my father works in construction, so I was like, that's a great ramp. Like looking at it, I was like, yeah, look at the gradient on that. And I was like, oh my God, who am I? Like seriously, like this is the conversation that I'm having with people. And then what the big thing that I noticed the difference over there was just like I suppose it's like the human resources training that all the people who were working in the village would have had to have gone through. So they were all finally equipped if someone came in, maybe they were blind, maybe they were missing a leg, maybe they were missing an arm, maybe they couldn't carry their shopping, maybe they're a wheelchair user, crutch user, whatever it may be. That was actually one of the big things that I noticed. So when I was in one of the shops, a person with a visual impairment came in, and the shop owner straight away noticed it, and she got up and she went and guided them all around the store. And I thought that was incredible. You wouldn't see that. You definitely wouldn't see that here, just she was able to clock it immediately. She was like, okay, I have to go help this person. And, she got all the stuff, she got all the goods, brought them to the checkout, and, did everything. And I'm not going to lie, my curiosity was getting the better of me. Like I was standing staring at it, just because I wanted to see what the end result was going to be. And it was just so, and not necessarily uplifting, but so normalizing, I think, just to see that like this fella walked into a shop totally unaided, had a visual impairment. Okay, he had his cane, but like someone was just able to get up and be like, hi, let's pretend Podge, I work with the shop. Do you need assistance around the shop? And the person was like, yeah. And that was it. Like it was just so normalized. And it was as if he was walking around with a friend, and she was like, you an athlete? What are you? And they were getting into massive conversation about that. So that was definitely one thing that I noticed, is that like we can have all the tech and we can have all the resources in the world, but it's actually humanity at the end of the day is in charge of the whole thing. And like no matter what, like we'll still need our family, friends, compatriots, teammates, whoever, workmates, whoever it may be, in a crisis or in a situation. Like a laptop or a fine prosthetic leg isn't going to get you out. You still need someone with you. And I thought that was the biggest thing that I took away from the Paralympics, was that sense of togetherness, and like disability but not disabled was kind of the big thing what I noticed over there.
Yeah, that leads very nicely into the next question I wanted to ask is how do you think sports, or maybe the Paralympics specifically, contribute to the broader conversation around disability and ability?
Yeah, like I think the big thing I suppose over what I noticed was that they were really focusing on using the word participation versus competing. So I mean, I would just call them competitors because it's an elite sport. So I would just say, oh, the competitors are, the people who are competing. But a lot of people outside, maybe it's just because I'm in the bubble, maybe so I didn't know, but a lot of people would say, oh, is Joanne participating in the Paralympics versus is she competing in the Olympics? And I didn't realize that was the thing until I actually started listening to people like having conversations and stuff. And like these are people who you think would even kind of know better. You're like, oh, that's really funny because like you actually know someone who's in it, and yet you're still saying the same thing. So it's funny, like all those like mind default settings, I guess, that you have to kind of navigate. So that was a big theme that I noticed over there, was that they wanted to be recognized for their elite performers. And then she was Australian, she was a wheelchair racer. She, in her interview after she got a medal, she basically chimed in the conversation. She said, at the end of the day, we're the 1% of the people with disabilities. The people with disabilities are at home and they have problems and they have real life problems and they're in pain and they're this and they're that. And they're not the people who you're looking at on television. Like these people are elite high performers, and you shouldn't be taking what they're doing as the default for what people with disabilities are doing like at home. And I thought that was really interesting, because definitely a couple people would have struggled, I think, with that. They would have seen people on the Paralympics maybe missing an arm and they would have been like, well, like she can do that. So like, why can't you do that? And you're like, oh, dude, like one, I'm lazy. I don't dedicate 4 years of my life to anything. So I just thought that was a really interesting kind of perspective. And then a lot of them this year were focused on language. A lot of the athletes were really focused on language. Again, like whether that's that's up to your own opinion, how you want to view things. So they particularly didn't want to use the word suffering when you were talking about people with a disability, because it had a negative connotation. We got loads of conversations about how to address people, which I kind of personally, I felt it would just wrap you up in knots. Whereas I'd prefer if the person told me how they wanted to be addressed or called, or what their disability was, or whatever. Whereas I think you can kind of tie yourself, especially on a live broadcast, you only have 10 seconds to kind of get things right. And your brain is flogged with things as well. So a lot of the time I was like, don't take it personally, like it's fine. But then you have a lot of athletes who just don't care. And that's actually where I would fall into the category. Like they'll tell you straight up what they want, and they're very vocal about it. And that's who you have to trust in on the end of it. But I even noticed it's all changed since I even did Tokyo, I remember we were told you could say little person and then it was person who's of short stature. That was changed again, I think, to something else. But again, I would just reach out to the athlete and I'd be like, hey, what do you want me to call you? And normally what they usually get back, and I would have the same responses. My name would be ideal, and I'm like, okay,
Yes.
that's pretty decent, so, and I would be of the same kind, but just in a broadcast, you're trying to get all your, your T's and I's, crossed and dotted. So, yeah, it was very, very interesting overall, I think, to experience, the athletes' thoughts and what they were thinking. And then like different countries as well, like was a big thing that I noticed. So we actually met the king and queen of para table tennis. They're a married couple from Nigeria.
Wow.
And he's missing a leg and she's a wheelchair user. And they met at a para table tennis training camp in Nigeria. And they're basically like, it shows the difference in what people are fighting for. So you team GB who are fighting for like equal pay and equal recognition in terms of the athlete side of things. And then the husband and wife, who are gold medalists, by the way, in their respective categories, they were solely fighting for like minor disability rights that we take for granted. So I thought it was interesting to see like the levels and the scales that exist in different countries as well.
Yeah, there's incredible nuance as you were just kind of explaining all that as well. You have like different countries and different stages of development. You have the individuals too, and that's the sense I got, is in terms of I appreciate how cognizant we're becoming around language, how inclusive it's trying to become, but ultimately, like you said as well, it's individualized as too, right? I think there's an extent you don't want to put everyone into a bucket either, because everyone is so vastly different. So I don't know, is that where you feel the sweet spot is like being able to treat the person as an individual and whatever their preference might be?
It's hard to know, like, it's even like before we came on and you were like, what's your title again? And I was like, oh God, we were laughing about it. Like, it's something as simple as that, just literally being like, oh, hey, what's that thing? That's kind of how I would address it. And that's how I went in, talking to the athletes. I went, the ones that I knew quite well and the ones I knew were focusing on. I was like, how do you want me to say this? Or like, what would you prefer? Or, maybe talk to their parents or, whoever, if they weren't, contactable, if they were in camps or whatever. So I think, as you said, it's about being kind of, in the moment, just being like, oh, hey, like, what's that thing you were talking about? But, a lot of people, like my dad isn't exactly the most subtle person of all time. So like, I know if it was my dad and he was over there, he'd be like, what's the horsepower in that wheelchair? And I'd be like, oh, dad, like really, like they're getting their lunch, like let them live. But, like it's coming from a place of pure interest. And I think that's the big thing as well, is that I noticed a lot of people over there, when the questions were asked, it was purely out of interest and niceness. Like there was nowhere you were like, ugh, like, one of those kind of
Right.
things. So that was really funny as well. And then when we all left the village and we're like meeting other people, like outsiders, let's say outsiders to the village in Paris itself, we were like, oh God, it's so different, isn't it? Like, and I think it was a Norwegian swimmer who called it a disability utopia. And I was told that at the start, and I was like, and now that I'm left it, I'm like, maybe he was onto something. Like, maybe he's right.
Do you feel when you're kind of immersed in the Paralympics, do you get a sense of like there's a lot of hope for the future when it comes to maybe more advanced technology, or the examples you've given about just in cultures in general having it? I don't know if I want to say more accepted. I kind of like the examples kind of you gave. Like you must have a high sense of hope in your Paralympics. Is there also a come down from that when you come back, or do you still have that hope in terms of developing the technologies or developing the environments for you to succeed?
I think like it's a mix of both. I think it's like now that I've seen it, like actually working, like you're like, oh my God, like that's what it looks like. Like that's crazy. And then you also have the come down because you're back in super value and you're dealing with the same hurdles. Poor super value, like my super value is crazy.
Yeah, yeah, why super
I
value?
know, poor super value. They're just right behind me. That's why.
Sorry,
Um,
Peter Keane and everyone else who
yes,
has a super value.
yes, and all the Garveys in Dingle and whatnot. Your super values are very kind and helpful and they do everything. No, but it's just funny, like how you just go back and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, like it is what it is. Like even it was even funny, like yesterday I took the dog out for the first time after coming back from Paris. And the first thing I noticed was the width of the footpath. I was like, if I was over in Paris, like two people could have passed, and I would have had to panic about going into the grass. So like it's just funny like how that all happens. I think like my wish and my demand is a bit dramatic, but let's say demand for the time being, would be that people who are in a position of like power, so like legislators, government officials, civil servants, councillors, whoever it may be, that they all get an opportunity to visit a Paralympic village. because it really does change your perception on a lot of things. And I think a lot of the things that you tie yourself up in knots of over like what ramp is suitable for this, like it just answers like all those questions like immediately. And I think the big thing was there was just no fear. Like there was just no fear in putting the thing in. Like if you needed it, they were like, okay, and they went and they got it, and it was like it is what it is now. Like we got to try it. So that was definitely like the big thing that I learned over there was just like if more people who are in charge, and like this isn't even in the public sector, like this is the private sector as well, like I would definitely like implore HR people even to go to a Paralympic village if possible. And it's not that you're using it as like a tour being like look at that, like it's just more of like you're able to be in an environment where you're like oh my god, like that's what it's like I was talking to one of the girls who came over at me, like who was assisting me with stuff, and she was like, Joanne, for the first time in my life I felt like an outsider. She was like, it was really bizarre. And I was like, I know. I was like, it's weird. I was like, it was the first time I felt like an insider. Like I was in on the jokes that were being made, and we were all like, tee hee hee, like amongst ourselves, and she was kind of left out. So yeah, it is. It's definitely something I think that everyone should go over to see and just experience, and hopefully come back with some learnings along the way. Because I think that was the big thing that I learned over there was just like we need more people in to see what it's like, and then people can kind of see like not to get too technical on it, but basically like in Ireland, we're kind of obsessed with the medical model of disability. So it's very like focused on like helping you medically to like live in your house independently. But the social model would be, okay, like how do we get from like her house to like the bank or like Centre or Super Value or like the club or the GA pitch and stuff like that. And I think we do need to move into a social model more than anything, because like this yourself from being involved with teams, like that's where you learn everything about yourself, about teammates, about life. Like that's where you learn, and that's what I'm a big advocate for, is getting people, like not whatever about sport, it doesn't have to be sport, but getting people into a team environment where you have to work with people and work through problems as a unit. And that's what really makes the big difference in you more than anything else.
That's such an interesting thought, and I think you're really onto something there. So you're saying if like in Ireland in particular, if you do have a disability, they think very insular in terms of, okay, let's make their house environment comfortable for them so they can navigate around there easily. Yeah, but you want to expand that out to a broader context. And you kind of gave me, I wouldn't call it a eureka moment, but I am thinking now the lack of, we'll say, structure in terms of when you mentioned about sport, and like I do see sport as a very important component of your life, but you're describing maybe if this is the experience you've gone through where you're speaking in generalization, they're getting the home life set up so you're comfortable, but we're not exactly focusing on the outer part, which contributes so much to how you grow up, how you interact within the community, how you feel, your happiness levels, like everything.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and I think the big thing is like getting out and about, like, bringing your friends, let's go pub, let's go club, like, let's go whatever it is. Like, if you were to think, like, off the top of your head, I mean, I'm not putting you on the spot, you don't have to answer, but if you were to think off the top of your head, if you and I were to go out in Killarney tomorrow night, that's what we do, Podge. Like, where can we go? And like, I'm not saying you're going to be hard pushed thinking about it, but because you can just get up over a step, you're not going to be thinking about it. So you're going to be like, oh, I'll take her here. And it's like, no, we can't go there. And you're like, why can't we go there? And I'm like, oh, that's cute, that you think we can get in there. So, but even if you're to think of our own club, I know obviously there's, stuff being done around our area, and, stuff will take time. But like I can't get to the balcony, where you kind of watch games, like I'm underneath you. So like it's stuff like that, and maybe I see you and I want to stand and watch a game with you, and we're going, did you see that there? Or, look at that, or oh my God, like that was a poor play. Like that's all part of it too. Like, we're not even talking about the playing. We're talking about merely just being welcomed into a club, and not even, it's like when I see certain clubs, and I think I see it more in Kerry, and I don't know if that's a thing, maybe, I'm not too sure. I definitely don't see it as much in Cork, but there's definitely more kids with Down syndrome I notice involved in clubs in Kerry compared to Cork. And I honestly don't know why. Like I don't have the numbers or the resources or anything to back that up. But I definitely, when I'm at year matches, like I would see way more kids with disabilities at year matches, not necessarily as in Legion, but whoever you're playing, compared to when I go to a game in Cork. And I don't know what that is actually. Like I genuinely don't know.
Yeah, that is interesting. I wonder, is there actually some basis behind it as well? But it's such an interesting concept. So you want, and it's a reason why you said if people visit the Paralympics, right, it can open, kind of expand their horizons a bit as well, and just see the world through like a different lens in that way, to try and make it even more inclusive. Because that's something so trivial, right? I think people just overlook, like when you said about where would you go out for a drink. Like the way I thought about going out at the start was like, oh, we could go to here or there, these are big spots. And then when you kind of rephrased it, now I'm thinking, Oh wait, but if we did go there, that would be difficult. But then if we went here, there's like 20 steps or 40 steps up to it. So even during that example, you got me to think through a different lens.
Yeah, like, and I think then on the flip side, then you want to go where it's hopping. You want to go where there's good crack as well. So you don't want to go to like a really dingy pub because it's got like one ramp and you're like, ooh, I can get in here.
Yeah.
Like me and my brother, like when he comes down from Dublin, like we go out in Killarney. I was just saying in general, like when someone goes out in Killarney, I'm sure if you've, family or friends coming in from different places, you want to take them to where it's fun. So you don't want that added obstacle of, oh God, like where can I actually take her? So yeah, it's funny like how your brain works, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is, and I do appreciate even that little brief conversation as well. I do kind of have a question that feeds off this, but bit of a big one, I guess, if you want to say. But if you could change one thing, either in Ireland or the world, for people with disabilities, what would that be?
Attitude, I think, would be the big one. Because I think if we were just a bit more conceptually aware of our spaces, like our physical spaces, it would make such a huge difference. Like when we're building, renovating, reconstructing, I don't know, whatever we're doing. I think the physical space is the big thing. And I think then you can work on different things. So like if I want to get a train, say to Killarney, from Mill Street to Killarney, because we do have a train, I have to phone ahead for a ramp 24 hours in advance. But like, if we're hanging out, I don't know what the two of us are going to get up to 24 hours in advance. Maybe you're like, I want to go to Tralee or I want to go to Limerick. So it's constantly having to plan your life. Whereas I noticed, and this is actually more when I was in New York as well, I noticed that I was just able to call an Uber very quickly, get on something very quickly. And then when I was living when I was in Dublin, the fun thing is then is the Lewis. I never used the Lewis so much in my life, but I was just so impressed I could drive on and off something. I was like, whoa, this is such a thrill. Like just mind blowing to me. So yeah, I think that's one of the big things. If we can get our physical spaces right, I think it'd be huge in terms of the rest of it. And then you can start working on like people's attitudes and stuff like that. And I'm not even talking big things, like I'm talking about like a ramp instead of a step or another way in or, so many different like bizarre things that other people would take for granted. One of the main places that we go to in Killarney has high tables. And high tables are fine, but I'm 4 foot, not fine for me. Again, you're a bit taller than I am, so me shouting up to you on night out isn't the most ideal situation. But it's just about redesigning those spaces and trying to figure it out, from there, I think is the big thing.
How can we go about tackling that? Just go to your local council. Just how can we create more awareness around that?
I can only speak for like companies that I've been in and worked for, but I've definitely noticed there's a huge shift in terms of trying to get the actual spaces, like private sectors, like a bit more accessible. The law firm that I work with, or I've signed a training contract with RDJ, they've moved into a new space down in South Mall. And it is as accessible as it can be, and they've done a pretty damn good job at it, trying to make it inclusive for everyone. But one of their current trainees is a wheelchair user. So, obviously there was input, put in on his end. So I've actually noticed that there's huge jumps being made in the private sector on our end, but the public sector is still lagging behind. And I noticed that in terms of certain things, RT is a public broadcaster, so it's public servant, so it's part of that public, funding model. And I just found it really funny how like asked to do certain things. No, there's nothing crazy about them, don't get me wrong. But I remember we wanted to get a ramp onto so I was on like a platform to be eye level with the girl that I was working with. And I remember like the levels I think that the poor lads had to go through to sign off on that ramp because it's the public body was wild. Whereas if I was the private sector, they'd be like, all right, Grant, we'll get a ramp, and they'd contact someone and away you go.
More red tape around the public sector stuff. So
Yeah, it's funny, like, because I work in law, and even when you're talking to people who work in this area, they're like, that's not a reason. Like, that's not a reason for that to be not to be done. Like, that's insane. And I think a lot of them don't realize it until you actually say it to them. And it is interesting then to hear their side of it because, of course you want to be like, well, is it the law? Like, must we change the law? And they're like, no, like part of the law must be changed, but they're like, no, that's no excuse for anything. Our old local nightclub across the way from me here, it's a listed building and they wouldn't. So listed buildings in Ireland is where it's historically preserved. So legally, you really shouldn't be touching it. And if you are to touch it, you have to get the exact same like paint, slab, block, whatever it is from like that era to like match up basically. And we wanted to put a ramp in there because my parents knew I was going to be going out with my friends to the nightclub and they wouldn't do it because they were like, it's a listed building. And 2 days later, they were like painting it away like no bother. My dad was like, really? Like you can paint it, but you can't put in a ramp. And eventually then my dad had to I wouldn't say dumb it down, but he kind of had to do it in simpler terms, which was look, like to the owner, like you're actually turning away a wallet. And he was like, oh my God, you're right. And that was how he, got through it then in the end. But it was ridiculous. My father was like, you better buy like 10 pints for people every night to make up for that man.
But that is kind of just mind blowing for me. It seems something so basic or something you think would be zero issues, and it turns out that it is.
Yeah, and again, like when you go to like actual people who work in that area law, they're like, that's not an issue. It's just about getting people to think. And I think that's the problem. Like people aren't thinking anymore. They're just jumping into something or just saying no because it's too much of a process for them.
Yeah, too much of a process though. But that's an issue in itself, right? The fact that it's a process.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. Like the amount of like you don't mind hearing a no, but then some of those reasons you're like, that's not a reason. Like that's just made up. Like you just were really struggling to grasp for something there. You were like, this will do. Like she won't look into it. And like I work in the area now, so I'm like, oh girl, I will. Like I'll even another example is the wheelchair in terms of flying. I don't know why I lifted up my joystick as if that was going to show you something. But basically, this chair is a heavy chair. Like I'll admit it, it's a really heavy wheelchair. It's 180 kilos. And to look at it, you wouldn't think it. Like you've seen the chair, so like it's not that big looking.
Wow.
And so obviously I have to sign off on all the forms when it's going traveling, and I don't mind doing that because you have to ask for the assistance, and it's better to be prepared. I like to be prepared anyway. And then I got an email, and they were like, "Oh, we don't think your chair can travel." And I was like, "Well, it's traveled before, so like, why can't it travel now?" And then they were like, "Well, like it's just the aircraft and stuff like that." And I was like, "Really?" And I was just so bored that day. I was like, "I'm going to read some legal documents here about the European like aviation strategy stuff here." So I went on to like the website, I got the forms, and I looked at it. And basically, what it says in the form is that so the batteries are built, thankfully, now. Because, like, I mean, they're expecting people to travel. Like, they're building wheelchairs so people can go and live their life, do whatever they need to do. So basically, the premise is that if the wheelchair, so batteries is the big thing, which I can understand. So that was one thing. And my batteries were under 300 watts, which was fine. But then the other thing was that if the chair is actually too heavier for a certain airplane, it's up to the airline to switch planes. So like they're the ones who have to do it. So basically a lot of it was just the airline were like, no, we just don't want to switch planes, just easier to boot her off. Whereas I got back to them, I was like, well, according to section blah blah blah, subsection blah blah blah, I actually can travel. And then I got the email going, okay, your chair is okay. And I was like, I knew it. Like I knew it.
Yeah, I mean, good on you, number one, but also you should not have had to do that. That should have just been a given, and it's kind of just an extra step that you had to take unnecessarily.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things. Maybe it's my legal brain that secretly enjoy doing it, being like, I'll look up some legislation here. But yeah, now I know for the future. So it's. But like you said, you just shouldn't have to do it. You should just book it, and if there's like a question or a query, grand, you can come back to me. But it shouldn't be
Mhm.
like we don't think we can take you. Like I was like, dude, I'm going over for work. Like I am not going to Benidorm for a 10 week like session. Like please.
The chair is really only 120 kg. You have 60
Yeah.
kg of vodka snuck in there somewhere.
Yeah, like why would I inflate it? So yeah, no, it was funny, but yeah, it was ridiculous at the time, but I was laughing about it afterwards.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the humor that you brought to it as well. And you mentioned kind of about your legal brain, and I'd love to just speak a little bit to your career in terms of first journalism, and now you're transitioning into law as well. I'm curious when it comes to journalism, like what advice might you have for someone who's currently studying journalism in college?
Yeah, so I suppose I have three, I guess, things that I would say to them. So the first one is put like a monetary value on your time, is the big thing. So a lot of media companies at the moment, for right or for wrong, are always looking for people to do experience, quote unquote. And to them, experience is the monetary thing. And I'm like, no, like you should at least get your diesel covered or whatever it may be. Like I'm big advocate if you're going on a job, you should at least get something in return, for your time, effort, expertise, whatever it may be. So definitely value your time, I think is the big one, like monetary wise. The second one I would say network as much as you possibly can and keep every single call card that you get because you just have no idea when you're going to use or need someone. And I found myself in situations where I'm like, I'll never use this. And then I'm in a situation where I'm like, oh my God, I need this person like so bad. So that's one, and it might even be in terms of a journalism thing, like it could be absolutely anything. And then I guess the third thing I would say was, and it's from a writer, he's dead now, Jimmy Breslin. And he'd always say, go to the losing dressing room. And I always thought that was really interesting because he used to always say, people will always flock to the winner's dressing room because they'll have a great story of like celebration and triumph and blah, blah, whatever. But the losers might have the better story. And it's about trying to carve that out a bit better. So I suppose in practice, what he did was, it's a really great piece. I recommend everyone read it. He did an article with John F. Kennedy's gravedigger. Because he had that sports mind in him. So he woke up and he said, okay, they're all going to be after the, like, the procession and whatnot. Where can I go? And he said, oh, I'll go to the graveyard and I'll meet whoever's digging the graves that day. So he met a couple of people and one of them was like, oh, I'm in charge of like grave, whatever it was. And he said, oh, do you mind doing an interview? And it's literally one of the most celebrated pieces
Wow.
of JFK's funeral. And I just thought it was really interesting because, again, it just goes back to it in terms of, you mightn't think they have an interesting story. Don't get me wrong. You could ring someone and they have a terrible story and you're like, great, that was a waste of my time. But you might find something in it, and it's up to you as a writer to find something. But yeah, it's a really good piece. And, it just shows the mentality of what he was doing. He was applying his sports kind of journalism philosophy of going to a losing dressing room and avoiding where everyone was going. And
what do you think is the most significant role of a journalist today?
Fact checking, I think, is the big thing at the moment that's going on. So my editor used to always say, don't be first, be right, because you can be first and have the total wrong story entirely. Like, as he was saying, you can be first and report, Killarney Legion won this game, but 10 minutes later they mightn't have won. So what's the point in that? So it's better to be right than to be first. That was a big thing that I learned from him. The other thing that he did tell us was, if someone tells you it's raining, go outside to check if it's raining. Don't just take their word for it. So that was a big thing that we did at the time. And I think in the era that we are in now, in terms of journalism and people not kind of tackling maybe certain people as much as they should, that's his words definitely kind of ring through there. And he was always someone who, my editor was always, he's retired now, but he was always someone who kind of had your back. Even if he did give out to you 99.9% of the time, you always knew when push came to shove in a situation, like, he always had your back and you could ring and be like, look, I'm having a struggle here. He's like, give me 5 minutes. And God bless the person who'd answered the phone within that 5 minutes because they were dead. But he was just such a nice guy. He was such an important person, I think, for me working in the Irish Times at the time. Malachy Logan, and like, he was the first person who gave me a chance in terms of sports writing. He obviously said, people don't know you as a sports writer, so you're going to have to prove it. And thankfully he gave me the opportunity to do it. Hopefully I did. I'm not too sure. I know I got 2 good articles out of Legion. So he was very delighted for that. So yeah, it's really funny, I think, how it all kind of comes around. And then I guess for me, the media landscape was kind of changing big time. The work wasn't kind of coming in as such. There was cutbacks being made. And I knew I had the degree and I just knew I had to do the FE1s, which are the entry to solicitor exams here in Ireland. So to be a lawyer. And eventually I kind of sat down and I thought, I'm 27 and kind of made the decision. I was thinking, I'm kind of happy with what I've done in media. Like, I'm ready to move on. And yeah, so I signed up, did a bit of work experience in a couple of firms, went to court for 6 weeks for work experience. That was mind-blowing and eye-opening in every way possible. And yeah, all the same principles apply. It's just very different in terms of, you still need to ask people questions, you still need to find out their story, except it's different because you need to defend them as the best you possibly can in certain situations, or prosecute them maybe the best you can. So it's interesting, yeah. And yeah, all the things that I learned are the same. I still networked with all the barristers, I have no fear. I don't know, it's just like an age thing, maybe like in my generation. I'm not too sure in younger generations. Like, I'd walk up to the barristers and say, hey, how's it going? Whereas, like, you're told really not to do that, but it doesn't bother me the slightest. I'm like, whatever. Like, we're all the same, so it is what it is.
Yeah, what inspired you to pursue law, and maybe how do you see this aligning with your work as an activist as well?
I guess it's really funny, like, they do overlap in certain areas. I think in terms of finding out how legislation is made, how laws are working, and all that kind of stuff, I think is very, very interesting. And I think people don't realize, like, the impact that laws and legislation and, potential things have actually on their everyday lives. And that's something, as simple as, working hours, being able to work from home legally, or something maybe as more complicated than is like childcare, care for someone with a disability, something a bit more, complex as that. It all has an impact in terms of what the decision makers are deciding and the legislation and stuff like that. So yeah, it definitely helps in that regard. Stability was kind of the big reason why I wanted to move into a firm. You have okay, it's not 9 to 5, like, it could be, depending on if you have a big court case or a big thing kind of coming up, it could be a bit longer. But just that ability of having like a 9 to 5, I think, was a big thing for me. And, being able to like have a weekend to myself is a big thing.
Yeah.
I haven't really had weekends to myself. Like I'll still, it's funny. I haven't really had a weekend to myself because I'm always at football matches. But like now I'm happily going to football matches. It's not like a work thing where I'm like, oh, I have to go cover this game and interview someone and like figure out why things were so poor or so great. So yeah, it was just like being able to go to a match and enjoy it is huge rather than having to have your eye on the laptop from about 60 minutes on and hope to God no one scores in the next half hour because you have your piece written and you just want to go home.
That's great. That's great you have that mentality because it could be the opposite, right? You could be at the game going, oh, geez, while I'm here, I might as well be doing, so why am I just doing some work? But you actually, it shows that you love it for the sport that it is and it just brings you joy.
Yeah, and like I knew when I signed up to the Irish Times, were like working for them, I had said to my editor, like I'm not someone who's good at stats. I'm not someone who can identify a tactic very much straight away, but I can give you a story. I can give you a story. Like I can meet people, I can talk to people, I can give you something that's a bit different. And I suppose to use the Jimmy Breslin expression, I can find your gravedigger if I need to, but don't expect me to be like, this is why so and so moved onto the wing, and once that happened, this changed that. Like I can do it, but maybe 5 hours after the top people can do it, but that's not what I was hired for. Like that's what I said to him. I'm not here to do that. You've really, really extraordinary people who can do that. And I noticed like some of the best pieces in the Irish Times, like are most read stuff, like not my stuff, but most of the other colleagues, like are the human interest stories from sports. And it's really nice to see that people still have an appetite for that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Right, going back to your law, like what stood out to you the most or shocked you the most maybe when it comes to studying law?
Oh God, the volume. And people had me warned. People were like, oh, Joanne, it's going to be hell on earth for you for a few years. I was like, it's not going to be
Be
that bad.
fine.
They were so right about it. There's a camaraderie that I didn't expect. I think in media, you're very much, even though there is a group of you and you do have your friends and you can hang out with them, you're still very much fighting for that story, and, you're very much a bit concealed about it. Whereas there's a huge difference in law where like people are quite friendly and camaraderie like amongst it, and I thought that was like when I was in criminal court, like albeit not very ideal for the client, if one of the solicitors has popped out for something and someone only wanted like a warrant signed or anything, one of the other solicitors who was friends with the main solicitor would have stepped up and been like, I'll get it signed, like it's fine. So I did notice there was a lot of good camaraderie there. Obviously in the bigger cases, obviously that doesn't exist because you're competing against each other. And don't get me wrong, I know that's very much there in real. But I was just very surprised at like when I went into the firm, like the amount of people from your cleaners all the way up to your big time partners, how much they were willing to be like, hey, do you need a hand? Like that was mind blowing to me. I was like, whoa, no one ever asked me that. I didn't even know how to respond. I was like, I just want to know where I can make a cup of tea. But like, because that's how like thrown off I was. So yeah, it was an interesting change, but I enjoyed it. It was nice.
Yeah, I don't know, is it me just getting all my information from series or movies, but you expect law firms to be very like business driven, like get this done, kind of aggressive almost. And you said you experienced the opposite, like people were very helpful to you no matter what position they were in.
Yeah, and I think that stereotype is true to a certain degree. Like, definitely when you go into the higher courts and into the bigger cases, like that definitely does exist. And you do see barristers and solicitors come in. So, like in Ireland, it's different. So, solicitors are people who, like, we can represent people in the lower court, so the district court, but we can't represent anyone above that. That's barristers. So, barristers are the ones who you normally see in Ireland speaking up with the wig and the cape or whatever. So, I'm training for the one below that, and solicitors feed the information into a barrister. So like it's a lot of teamwork and it's a lot of everything. And yeah, it's actually fun. But don't get me wrong, there are people who are very cutthroat and think they are like in an episode of Suits, they're Harvey in Suits. And I'm like, dude, like
That's
it's
what came to my mind. Yeah.
dude, it's raining outside and you're driving a Ford Fiesta. Like, let's not, like, come on now, like Harvey from Suits has like a Lambo, like seriously. So yeah, there is a little bit of that. Like some people do, but I have to say it is taken out of them very quickly, actually, surprisingly enough.
A small bit of notions from time to time, but I guess that's the same in nearly every walk of life, every industry.
Why not? Why not? I'm all for it. Like, I think if people are upfront about it, like I love it. Like my perception in RTE was someone who does boozy brunch with the gals, and I thought that was really funny. I must give off that vibe to someone. I was even talking to one of your teammates, and they had said the same thing. They were like, "Oh, we thought you were always too good to like hang out with us." I was like, "No, I'm only mad to hang out with people." So it was very funny. Like, it's very funny to hear the like perceptions that people have as well.
Yeah, especially when they start to get to know you, then there's that realization like, oh shit, this isn't like the person I thought that you were going to be.
Yeah, I know. And it's the same as well for me on your end, like some of you I'll be like, oh God, and then others I'm like, oh, he's actually dead on sound, that's actually wild. I thought he'd tear the head off me or something. No, it's no non-legion, to be fair.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Joanne, just as we kind of wind down the conversation, I feel like we could honestly talk for this could be like a 3 or 4 hour podcast, like super easy. You're obviously very, very easy to talk to, very, very knowledgeable. If people do want to follow your journey, like where can our listeners follow your work and continue to support you?
Yeah, I guess at the moment I'm not writing. I'm focusing on the law stuff. So, there's nothing very publicly kind of put out there. Some of the Paralympic stuff is available on the RTE player, which is quite good. And you can definitely check that out. But other than that, if you want to see quality dog and football content, Joanne War is my Instagram. So you can, I delved into as much as I could about, stuff behind scenes at the Paralympics. So if people want to check that out, then they're more than welcome. But for a lot of the time, it's a lot of dog spam. So brace yourself.
Joanne, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. Thanks and take care.